Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really quiet but honestly profound crisis. We're looking at how our very own church structures might literally be choking out organic leadership growth. We'll be diving into the blueprint laid out in the Timothy Mandate. So, if you've ever looked around and felt this massive gap between the vibrant life-on-life discipleship we see in the New Testament and the highly programmatic reality of modern church life, well, you're in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with a pretty uncomfortable question. What if the very systems we designed to grow the church are actually suffocating it? Think about it. What if our modern obsession with hierarchy, credentials, and institutional control has unintentionally strangled true discipleship? The crazy thing is, this didn't happen through malice, and it certainly didn't happen through heresy. It happened through structure. Across the world, so many churches are waking up to find themselves trapped in this endless cycle of maintenance. Leadership pipelines have turned into bureaucratic filters, and spiritual fathers, they've turned into administrators. We're going to explore exactly how we got here, and much more importantly, how we can fix it.
The core of the problem is captured perfectly by this idea. We built ladders when Jesus built tables. Just let that sink in for a second. When you actually study the ministry of Jesus, he didn't build a heavily layered corporate institution. He built relational proximity. He literally walked with people, ate with them, and corrected them right there in motion. But somewhere along the way, we swapped out that organic multiplication for professionalized supervision. We started building corporate ladders instead of pulling up chairs to relational tables. And this brings us to what's essentially a broken chain. See, we've replaced real discipleship with structures that are completely optimized for control. If you look at 2 Timothy 2:2, it urges this beautiful four-generation chain of life-on-life formation. Paul tells Timothy to take what he's heard and entrust it to faithful men who will then go and teach others. It's brilliant. But in most modern churches today, that chain is completely shattered. And because it's broken, churches are literally forced to import their leaders from the outside because their internal structures just don't produce them anymore. So how exactly did this chain break? Well, it happened through three really subtle substitutions. The first one is replacing intentional personal formation with the weekly sermon. Now, let's be absolutely clear. Good doctrine and public proclamation are completely essential, no question about it. But we've somehow created this false dichotomy. We started treating the Sunday sermon as the primary and sometimes only instrument for personal formation. And guys, preaching without personal discipleship, it's like scattering seed on totally unprepared ground. It was never meant to do the heavy lifting of life-on-life mentoring all by itself. The consequence of relying just on the sermon is what we call spectator formation. Preaching without personal discipleship creates passive spectators, not active shepherds. I mean, you can sit in a fantastic, healthy preaching environment for years, but if you are never personally formed by someone who's further along in their faith, you are missing something absolutely vital. The result is that we end up with these massive congregations full of informed spectators, people who admire a model from a distance rather than actually stepping into the messy, formative furnace of shared life. Moving on, the second substitution we see is replacing organic relationships with managed programs. In a really genuine attempt to foster community, churches created all these small groups, events, and outreach initiatives. And don't get me wrong, while those programs do offer a great point of connection, connection absolutely does not automatically equal transformation. Somewhere along the line, we exchanged the intentional, deeply personal formation of one person by another for a managed calendar event. And the fallout from that? Anonymous formation. When you have a highly managed program, it is incredibly easy to just hide in the back row. There's literally no one close enough to name your specific behavioral patterns or address your particular weaknesses or actually call you to specific obedience. It's a very valuable form of connection for sure, but it is fundamentally anonymous. And frankly, it is just not the discipleship that the New Testament describes. Okay, the third substitution happens when we start treating simple information transfer as the ultimate finish line. We somehow started to believe that if people just had the right data, the right curriculum, the right stack of books, the absolute right theological precision, they would just automatically become mature disciples. But here's the catch. Well-managed information delivery completely ignores the character and missional requirements of true biblical formation. It's mostly just head knowledge. Furthermore, relying purely on information completely bypasses the reproductive aspect that Jesus intended. When data transfer becomes the finish line, the whole goal of reproduction practically vanishes. Think about it. You can transfer data to 1,000 people at once from a stage, but you absolutely cannot reproduce deep spiritual formation at scale without personal investment. The end result? A church that knows a whole lot, but doesn't actually produce people who carry the gospel into the next generation. So how do we fix this? Well, a massive pivot is required here. We literally have to move away from that corporate maintenance model, the one that's super heavy on oversight, titles, and centralized bureaucracy. Instead, we need to return to a biblical model that is entirely optimized for multiplication, relational proximity, and distributed maturity. If we want to rebuild that broken chain, we have got to abandon those rigid ladders and start building tables again by fully embracing organic relational growth. And why is this pivot absolutely critical? Because discipleship literally must move faster than bureaucracy. The early church, they didn't expand by perfecting their administration, right? It grew like wildfire because ordinary believers carried living discipleship right into their everyday lives, completely bypassing any institutional bottlenecks. I mean, if a young leader has to wait 3 years for a committee to approve a simple youth outreach while spiritually starving people are sitting right next to them, that structure is actively strangling growth. Ultimately, the goal isn't just producing smart consumers of religious content. Listen to this. Biblical discipleship produces people who cannot be shaken and who form others. The true goal is personal formation across 3 critical areas: doctrine, character, and mission. It's about producing unshakable people, people whose doctrine has genuinely become character, which remains totally visible under pressure, and then naturally overflows into evangelism and the forming of others. Now, if you are listening to this and feeling totally crushed by your current church schedule, take a breath. There is a lifeline here. It's called the Minimum Viable Model, or MVM for short. This is basically an executable core of intentional formation, and it's completely stripped of all that heavy, programmatic complexity. It gives leaders an accessible, grounded alternative that literally anyone, no matter how ridiculously busy you are, can start today without needing a committee's approval or a brand new budget. While this model is intentionally minimal, it does have 3 absolute non-negotiables. First up is intentionality, meaning this isn't just casually hanging out, it's a prayerfully selected relationship with a very clear, stated purpose. Second is proximity. You have to share enough of real life together that your formation responds to actual, real-world circumstances, not just hypothetical theories. And third is reproductive vision, keeping the horizon of sending someone out in view right from day one. These 3 things, they are the absolute bedrock of the model. So practically, what does this look like? Well, it follows a default meeting rhythm that doesn't require hours of massive prep time. It just flows in 3 really simple parts. First, life exposure. This is where you share honest realities, what happened this week, where you actually struggled, or where you succeeded. Second, scripture, engaging a biblical text together as the governing instrument of your meeting. And third, forward movement, making sure you always walk away with a highly actionable assignment or specific prayer focus. It's remarkably simple, but it's deeply transformative.
But here's a crucial warning. To actually implement this church-wide, we have to confront the myth of the delegated culture. Actually, scratch the idea that you can just hand this off. A true discipling culture cannot simply be delegated to a committee or just handed to the youth pastor. It doesn't work that way. Culture always flows from what the leaders treat as normal. The pastor literally has to be the chief discipler. If the senior leadership is not personally, intentionally forming 2 or 3 others, the congregation will instantly realize that discipleship is just something the church talks about, not something it actually does.
As we look to the future, it is so incredibly vital to remember that movements grow differently than institutions. Institutions grow through centralized maintenance, but movements, they grow through living, breathing multiplication. The next great expansion of the church is definitely not going to come through larger stages, slicker programs, or a stronger bureaucracy. It's going to come through smaller circles. It'll come through proximity and through very ordinary people committing to real, life-on-life formation.
So before we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a hard, honest look at your own leadership ecosystems. Ask yourself, are your structures actually producing disciples, or are they just delaying them? Every single bureaucratic layer you add between people and responsibility literally slows down multiplication. If your culture prizes credentials above character, you might be accidentally building an institution that protects itself way more than it empowers its people.
Because in the end, our ultimate goal is not celebrity leaders. It's not perfectly polished, pristine church programs. The real goal is reproducible shepherds. It is all about recovering the very heart of 2 Timothy 2:2, ensuring this beautiful, unbroken chain of life where one mature believer deliberately forms another. It's time to stop building ladders and start building tables. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this challenges you to look at your own structures in an entirely new light. So, what's your next move?